Folks, welcome back to Flatirons Tuning. We're here today because we have to talk about CAFE standards, the fleet fuel economy numbers, because it's having a big impact on the cars that we can buy. It's really having a big impact on Subaru. We've gotten a very common comment that I've seen a bunch in a lot of the recent videos we've done talking about some of the EVs and whatnot that Subaru's coming out with, saying, well, why don't they just bring back the GC, make a car like the GC again? That's what we want. We want a small, fun, lightweight car. Well, the answer is Subaru probably can't make it. In fact, if they did, it might actually put them out of business. Not because nobody would buy them. In fact, quite the opposite. The more people that would buy a GC, the worse it is for Subaru, because the more fines they would have to pay because it doesn't meet the required fuel economy standards. It could sink the business because it would be huge. We're going to get into it because I think it's really important to understand what's going on with these CAFE standards as far as the cars that we can buy, especially in terms of Subaru, because this has a really big impact on Subaru. And in fact, there's some changes coming that are going to have an even bigger effect on Subaru potentially. But it also really frames and makes sense of what Subaru is doing. So we've got to get into that. Before we do, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, hit the hype button if you see it. That helps us out a ton. We got to get the word out about this because I think we need to have this conversation to understand why Subaru is doing what it's doing. Because basically what they're doing with all these EVs and the hybrids and stuff, that's what they have to do if they're going to outlast these new economy standards that are coming out probably in 2028. Let's go back to the beginning. CAFE standards. It's been kind of commonly understood, that average fleet economy of all the cars the manufacturer makes has to hit a certain number, and as time goes on, they have to be more and more efficient. Well, there was a change that happened in 2007, and this was part of the Energy Independence and Security Act. They brought in a new calculation. It wasn't just a fleet fuel economy average that they had to hit. They started looking at each specific car based on the car's footprint. This was a calculation around the wheelbase and the average track width. That generated the footprint of the car, and the smaller the car was, the higher the economy target that the car had to hit was. And as time goes on, based on this size, the economy targets got higher and higher. The minimum footprint for this calculation is 41 square feet. Anything 41 square feet and smaller maxes out. And then there's a maximum calculation as well. Well, it turns out right now, if Subaru would produce a GC, that car has a footprint of 40 square feet. It puts it below the minimum, so it's maxed out. Right now in 2026, that car would have to hit about 60 miles per gallon, otherwise there would potentially be a fine. That's why Subaru's not making these, and that's why nobody's making small cars like that, pretty much, because how do you make a car the size of a GC but that can get 60 miles to the gallon? It is extremely difficult. Like one of the example cars given is the Honda Fit, and that's, I think, why Honda doesn't make the Fit anymore, because even the Fit couldn't be made to get 60 miles to the gallon. I mean, the Prius, it would have to be something like that to have a fighting chance of getting rated at 60 mpg, to be that small, to have that small of a footprint, and still get the fuel economy standards. If you think about it with this footprint, I think what they originally intended was to say, well, the smaller the car, we want to make sure that the manufacturers keep building the efficiency into these smaller cars. What they didn't anticipate was that the auto manufacturers would look at this sliding graph and go like, well, we can make an engine that is this efficient, well, like this efficient, but the car is this small. So we have to make the car bigger so that basically the footprint then hits the efficiency of the engine that we can build. This is why cars have continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because as time goes on and the small footprint efficiency goes up, well, they just make the footprint bigger. Like the 22 WRX, that car is actually bigger. It's longer and wider than the 2005 to 2009 Legacy, which was the big car back then. For the foreseeable future, probably everything's just going to continue to get bigger, because that's how the auto manufacturers get the ability to hit, or at least gives them a fighting chance to hit these economy standards. So that's what's going on with all these small cars that basically have just disappeared. So a quick note here about the penalty for a car manufacturer if you don't hit your CAFE fuel economy standards. Right now, as we're recording this in 2026, the penalty modifier is $0. And that was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that went through Congress in 2025. Now, what's different about this situation currently is that prior to that, the Department of Transportation had the ability to adjust this penalty modifier, to account for inflation and that sort of thing. What's different is now that this is basically a law that's gone through Congress. That is what has taken the ability to change this modifier away from the Department of Transportation. But the fuel economy standards are still there, although the One Big Beautiful Bill Act does change the targets, but the standards are still there. This footprint calculation is still there. It's just the penalty is $0. And the difficult part for the car manufacturers is, do you assume that, well, because the penalty is $0, that's just what it's going to be for a long time going forward? Or do you assume that basically you have to plan that these penalties are going to come back, because if Congress passes any other law through, that then either gives the power to adjust this penalty multiplier back to the Department of Transportation or changes it to a different number other than 0, all of a sudden those penalties would be in effect. So this is a really hard part for the car manufacturers to navigate right now, because there's the fuel economy standards, but the penalty is currently 0. So it's hard to know what's going to happen. And just like when this went through and the penalties went away, they could just as quickly come back again if Congress modifies the language in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that is the balancing act that all these auto manufacturers are playing with and working within. And you just kind of have to assume that the safer path is to assume that those efficiency standards are going to come back into play sooner rather than later. Now in 2028, there's some big changes that are coming that are going to have some really big effects on Subaru specifically. But let's talk about the changes first. This is part of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I guess this is still not finalized, but this is what's being discussed. The first thing is that currently, if you have a fleet of cars and you don't meet your economy, you can buy credits from manufacturers that are over their target, and you can apply that to yours to basically offset so you don't have to pay a fine directly. And I can't find specific numbers, but it's pretty well known that Subaru, among a lot of other manufacturers, are buying these credits primarily from Tesla because they don't have any emissions. In 2028, likely that is going away. So what that means is that each manufacturer is going to be on their own. If you miss your target, if you miss your fuel CAFE standards, you're just going to have to pay the fine. You cannot offset it by buying credits from other manufacturers. So that's a big deal. This is why I think Subaru is bringing on so many EVs so aggressively, and we kind of need them to do well and people to get excited about them, because that's what Subaru is going to need as of 2028 if they can't buy these credits from other manufacturers to keep from paying these fines, or they're just going to have to pay the fines. That's going to be a limiting factor. The better Subaru can do with these EVs and the hybrids that they have now, the less effect they're going to have on some of these cars, like say a new STI, that's going to be far away from the economy standard. So we really want these EVs and hybrids to do well. The other thing that's coming in 2028 that is proposed is the classification for an SUV is going to change dramatically, so that the estimates that I'm seeing is most SUVs, at least that are built on a unibody construction, are probably going to fall under passenger cars instead of light trucks. And the thing is, light trucks, their economy standards are much lower than passenger vehicles. And this is why, like if you think the Forester, the Outback, the Ascent, they're all SUVs. Not long ago, the only SUV was the Tribeca or the Ascent. They've made everything bigger to the point where they can say that all three of them are SUVs, because then they have lower economy standards that they have to hit. If that also goes away in 2028, what is Subaru going to do with these larger vehicles? We're just going to have to wait and see. I don't envy Subaru on that one, but that's going to make it much more challenging for them to get those cars or vehicles to hit the economy standards that they need to if they get reclassified as passenger cars instead of light trucks. So that's a huge challenge for Subaru that they're facing in 2028. This is why there's an EV for every very popular selling combustion vehicle that they have, because they're really going to need those EV offsets, especially if in 2028 they have to get rid of, say, the Forester, the combustion engine Forester, which is one of their best-selling cars. Because if it gets reclassified as a passenger vehicle and doesn't meet the economy standards, or maybe it's only the hybrid that would be left, it just really challenges Subaru. And then how are they going to come out with an STI? Well, they really need these efficient vehicles to basically give them the ability to have their fleet economy standard to be within this range, hopefully. Subaru actually is specifically focused, or much more affected than most manufacturers by this footprint calculation, because of the engine and drivetrain that they use, the boxer engine and the symmetrical all-wheel drive. This is because the engine in a Subaru sits in front of the transmission, and then the front axle comes out of basically the front differential in the transmission. This is across almost all Subarus. This means that for any Subaru that has the same bumper-to-bumper length of most other cars, it's going to have a shorter wheelbase because that front axle is pushed back much more, because it has to be behind the engine and behind like the first part of the bell housing of the transmission. So that just gives them a shorter wheelbase. The only option that Subaru's had at this point is they keep making the cars longer, which is what they have to do, and wider, but then that makes them also heavier, makes it harder to hit these economy standards. Like, there's a whole bunch of challenges that Subaru is facing with the symmetrical all-wheel drive system that they're using. This is why, like the BRZ, for instance, people have said, well, why don't they make it an all-wheel drive? Well, if they did, the wheelbase would be even shorter. Probably the economy standards would be even harder to hit because of the short wheelbase. And all-wheel drive, the parasitic loss is all there. It just would make it so much more complicated for a BRZ that's all-wheel drive to hit these economy standards. But Subaru's savior could be right underneath their nose, and it could be this new all-wheel drive BRZ that they're racing in Japan now, the Boxer Rally Spec Z, which is actually running the same drivetrain the Vermont sports car has been developing since 2015 with the SEDEV transmission that uses a transfer case and a forward prop shaft and a front differential that sits underneath the engine, because it lets you push the engine much further back and then stretch out the front wheelbase. If Subaru is watching, and I know I've gotten hints every now and again that Subaru does pay attention here, I hope you guys are thinking about this, because if you would adopt this new drivetrain, so we've already learned from Horizon about the benefits, and arguably this is why a lot of the Vermont sports cars have been so good, is because it's a front mid-engine layout instead of this traditional symmetrical Boxer layout where you have all of the weight over the nose of the car. Well, there's handling and performance benefits, but it also stretches out the wheelbase. This could make it possible for Subaru to have a much longer wheelbase and a much bigger footprint in a much smaller car if they would develop a version of this drivetrain that's suitable for all of these vehicles, passenger vehicles. It would greatly increase their footprint, but the bumper-to-bumper size would be much smaller, and we get all these handling benefits. So I hope Subaru's thinking about this, and we're going to do a deep dive on this Boxer Rally Spec Z here in this next video, but I wanted to frame it and explain all these CAFE standard changes that are coming, because I don't know that Subaru's thinking about this. I hope they are, but if they're not, I really think that they should be, because with all of the other changes that they're doing, again, I think that Subaru is doing everything that they can and that they need to do to basically keep the brand going, to keep themselves profitable, and to hopefully give us, you know, a small production number of these cool performance cars that we want, like the new STI. But if they think about this drivetrain option and what it would give them in terms of possibilities for small, lighter cars with a bigger footprint, so they don't have to be as economic, or don't have to hit as high of a fuel economy number. Plus, part of the calculation for these SUVs has to do with approach and departure angles. It might make that easier for them to hit as well. There's a lot of big positives for Subaru if they look at this new drivetrain. So we're going to dive more into that in the next video when we take a look at the Boxer Rally Spec Z, some of what's working, some of the obstacles that they're having. But for right now, I wanted to make this video to go into the detail about all of these effects of the CAFE standards, the footprint, and how it's really affecting Subaru a lot, and why they're bringing out all these electric vehicles and the hybrids, and how we as enthusiasts, we actually need to get behind these cars, because the success of those, even though if you're not excited about them right now, that's what's going to help Subaru stick around, hit these numbers, and still be able to produce some of these more exciting cars that we as enthusiasts are looking for, but they really need the more efficient cars and the EVs to do well to give them the ability to make those. So just wanted to get that out of the way first so that we can now have a more detailed discussion about this Boxer Rally Spec Z. Thanks for sticking around to the end if you got to this point, and hopefully this helps kind of reframe what Subaru's doing and why they're doing it. As I started going down this path, I have a much greater appreciation and understanding of why Subaru's doing what they are, and I'm kind of glad that they are doing it, and I hope that you are too. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. Until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.